What compliment did you get that you won't forget? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. One day when I was in college, I was standing on a corner waiting to cross the street. Across the intersection, an attractive girl in a convertible was smiling at me and did this little swooshing gesture with her hand and pointed at me while bobbing her head. Flirting. A pretty girl flirted with me. With me, that was 30 years ago, and I remember it with perfect clarity. Story 2. My 10th grade English teacher told me I was one of the most talented students he's ever had. He was my favorite teacher long before he said that, so it meant and still means a lot to me. Writing has always come naturally to me, and it's an important way for me to express myself since I suck at verbal articulation. Story 3. On one of the worst days of my young life, I was in a terrible situation and kind of wandering downtown trying to get it together. Just crying and crying. I see two homeless men approaching from an alley, and typically I'm a kind and generous person towards the homeless, but on this day I just didn't have it in me. So I just put my head down and kept walking. As I got close, I heard an "excuse me" and prepared to tell them not today, but one of them looked me in the eyes and said, "You have the most beautiful face." They never asked for anything, just kind of shuffled me over to this half wall, and we sat while I cried a bit more, and they comforted me. It's a truly humbling experience to have someone who has literally nothing be kind and caring to you. Story 4. It's not as much a compliment, but context is that I met a friend online who I ended up hitting it off with. Apparently, at first they thought I was annoying because I was naively optimistic back then, but when they had to go into a mental hospital, it was the thought of coming back to me that kept them going. Me, on the other hand, I waited day in and day out for them. I left comments on their profile asking if they were back yet, leaving notes in our messages updating them on recent events in our friend groups. They hadn't told us why they left, so I was waiting on nothing. Then they came back and replied to each and every single one of my messages. We've been friends for 6 years and ongoing. Story 5. I had a friend like this. When he'd go through hard times, I'd just send messages saying, "I care about you and hope you're okay. No need to respond." After a few months, he'd start replying again. This went on for years. Anyway, the last time his family responded that he'd passed away from illness. After the funeral, I spent time with them, and they told me I was obviously a special person to him because he rarely talked to anyone, much as we talked to each other. He'd also had some positive changes in other relationships I didn't even know of as a result of conversations we'd had. I still miss him and think of him often, and I won't forget that. We often don't know how much we matter to others even if they don't say it directly. Story 6. I saw a therapist for a couple years a while back. One of the assistants and I were doing pre-appointment things. Jokes were had. She was from Jamaica, and I was curious how she put herself in Iowa of all places, and had a pretty good approximately 15 minutes. That was the only time she and I interacted. Flash forward a year, I was called to the back and put in a new office with someone else. I was a little suspicious, but thought maybe there was a transition going on. But that assistant came careening around the corner saying that was definitely not where I was supposed to be. Didn't look at schedules or anything. Just saw me and said that isn't right. The compliment is that she remembered me all that time later after just one short interaction. And I mean just that once prior, I hadn't seen her in the offices, but those times. Perhaps angels do exist. Story 7. My company worker mentor passed away after working at the same company for 50 years. She was 80-ish. She was an AHA, American Heart Association instructor who helped people with developmental and intellectual disabilities. Dedicated her entire life to helping. She was also my grandma's best friends forever. So I knew her forever. One day, after a class I taught, a student came up to me who hadn't know how close her and I were and said, "Cheryl, I just want you to know. Deceased staff name would be so proud of you." Story 8. During Christmas Eve, I was at my workshop mopping the floor. It was early in the morning, and I remember I put a little bit more effort into my appearance. So I wore a nice black dress with colorful sleeves, did my makeup differently, and put on something like a headband with small ears. In my country during Christmas Eve, children go to houses and shops and sing songs, something like Halloween, and we either give them treats or money. So these two little girls come to the shop, sing, I give them their money, and they leave. After about 10 seconds, one of them came back running, entered the shop and said, "Miss, you look beautiful." I almost cried right there. I'll never forget it. Story 9. My area was hosting the international convention about 10 years ago, and one of the guys in my chapter needed someone to help set up chorus risers at one of the venues. He gave me a call. I had to be there at 8 a.m. and setup would take about 90 minutes. Not my favorite thing, but it's helping out the convention. I was there early with a large coffee for both of us. We got the riser set up no problem. I was on my way home by 10 a.m. Later, he sent me a note to thank me for helping out. He could have asked a bunch of people, but he said he chose me because he knew that I'd be reliable. That made my day. Story 10. I am an actor and have done a lot of roles in local productions. I was doing Noises Off, and after the show, my stage manager said that he had someone that wanted to meet me. When I walked out of the dressing room, there was Steve Martin standing in front of me. I about shishti myself. He said he wanted to tell me that he has seen Noises Off several times, including Broadway. He said, I have seen this role played by several big-name stars, and that performance was one of the best he had seen. I tried to keep my cool and failed miserably. I mean, WTF. Steve Martin was in the audience the whole time and nobody told me, and he wanted to meet me. I thanked him with a shaky breath. He just wanted to meet me in person so that he could tell me that. He was in town filming a movie and wanted to get out of his motel room and saw that Noises Off was playing at the local theater. It is one of his favorite shows. I tried to be cool and didn't lose it until he was out of screaming distance. It was probably one of the greatest moments of my life, let alone my career. Story 11, 2015. I'm in a suit and tie. I just graduated college, and I'm heading out to interview for what would become my first full-time job after undergrad. I happened to have some cash on me, so I stopped by my local bank branch to deposit it in the at the moment, before driving to the interview. The ATM is inside, but there is another door you have to open to go into the branch. The door is glass so people in line for the moment can see what's going on inside, and the bank tellers can see who is in line for the at the moment. After I deposit my cash, I step out to walk to my car, and then I notice the youngish-looking bank teller woman. She looked to be in her mid-20 seconds, step out of the counter to walk out. She literally just walked out to tell me, "Excuse me. I just wanted to tell you that you look very handsome this morning." I just smiled, thanked her, and then told her to have a good day. She walked back in, and I went to the interview. Never got her name, but it made my morning. Story 12. A few years back, I had developed some sort of autoimmune disorder that included alopecia like hair loss in big splotches around the sides and top of my head. Lost my entire beard, gained like 60 pounds, and was just feeling awful about myself. My wife and I were in Portugal, and we were in a shop looking at some stuff. We had just taken some pictures together on this big patio overlooking the gorgeous town of Sintra, and all I could see was my bloated face and big bald spots. So I wasn't feeling so hot about myself and was medicating with probably one too many sangrias. Well, as we were paying for our art that we were buying, we naturally started talking to the young lady who was working in the shop. She was drop-dead gorgeous, maybe in her late 20 seconds, early 30 seconds, and some part of our conversation made me make some offhand comment about being ugly now, and she literally took her hand and put it on my arm and said, "Stop it. Please don't ever call yourself ugly. When you two walked in the store, my first thought was, what a beautiful man you are, and your wife is also gorgeous." I looked down at her arm and noticed she had vitiligo, and I think she saw me looking at it and said, "You are beautiful, and you are so much more than a few spots on your head." Waterworks, man. I literally broke down ugly crying in that store because of what she said to me. Hell, I am tearing up just writing it. In my entire life, it was the kindest, most genuine and touching thing a human being has ever said to me. Even now, when my hair has grown completely back, whenever I see that art on our wall, I am reminded of that moment. I wish I could thank her for what she said to me, but I was just trying to hold it together at the time. Story 13. Was at a friend's pool party. I had been hitting the gym pretty consistently for the year prior and felt very confident in my looks for the first time in a long time. I had just gotten out of the water to grab a beer when my buddy stopped by and we were chatting. His female friend shows up and gives him a hug. He introduces me to her. She looks me up and down, and about seconds after meeting me, "Okay, I'm sorry if this is rude, but you are insanely hot. Do you have a girlfriend?" I just chuckled and said, "Yes, I do. I'm sorry." And she got all upset and walked away. She was also pretty dang attractive. After she leaves, my buddy goes, "Bro, I know you're happy with your girl and all, but if I know Sarah, she was totally gonna suck your dick in the bathroom later." I just laughed, but I still think about that compliment 3 years later. I've never had someone so blatantly come on to me before or since. Story 14. Someone remembered me standing up for them in middle school years after it happened. I ended up working with someone who I went to school with like 20 years prior and hadn't seen since we were in school. We did plenty of catching up in the time we worked together, and she told me that she never forgot me. In middle school, she was transferred from another school, and we ended up sharing some classes. There were a couple of girls who were just picking on her relentlessly, and she remembered me and described me in a metal band t-shirt, black hair, all black everything. Yes, I was one of those girls. Turn to the girls and tell them, why don't you shut the F up and leave her alone? And they stopped immediately. I had a bit of a reputation. I remember her transferring, and I thought I might have said something to the girls, but I chalked it up to a fantasy of what I wish she would have done. I had a lot of problems growing up. I was tough as a result of those problems. And as an adult, I thought I was only mean and cold and careless towards people, and I had a lot of regrets about who I was as an adolescent. Hearing that I actually helped someone and they never forgot it when I completely forgot about it really was the best thing I could have ever heard from another person. It reminded me that I wasn't perfect, but I also wasn't the worst person in the world in the past that I could never change like I thought I was. Story 15. Had a crazy crush on a beautiful girl at work in 2005 when I was 23. She worked in a different department. I didn't know her name. She really stood out. One night, our shifts overlapped. I saw her walking toward me in a long hall. My stomach dropped. She stopped when we met and said, "You know who you look like? Butch Walker." And then she smiled and walked away. I was bummed because anytime anyone in the past said I looked like someone, it was terrible. Also, I had no idea who Butch Walker was. Sounded like a pitcher for the Texas Rangers or something. Managed to remember the name and Google him. What a good-looking and cool dude. She sort of liked me. Asked a coworker her name and found out she was fired a day or two later. Found a mutual friend and added her on MySpace. Ended up falling desperately in love with her for 3 years until we both fell out of that love and moved on. She had a kid, and I'm married now. It was an amazing relationship with lots of ups and some small downs, and we both grew and learned and experienced that crazy, crazy love that only the youth can feel. Highly recommended. Edit. I look like the knockoff Butch Walker who is shorter and not that good looking or nearly as cool. Edit 2. For visual context, she looked like a darker emo version of Chappell Roan in her recent Tiny Desk concert while we were at work. When I say she stood out, I mean she really stood out. Alright folks, that's a wrap. If you like more of this, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can also share your thoughts in the comment below. I'll see you in the next video.